Sam McKewon from the Omaha World Herald leads us off on hour number 2 of the Damon Benning Show with Ravi Lula. Sam, how are you this morning?
I'm good. How are you?
We
Sam.
are doing just fine. Sam, let's just jump right into this because there's a lot going on after a win against Northern Illinois, first and foremost having to do with the quarterback position. As you look at all of the data available to us, right? Jeff Sims, 2 games against Power 5 opponents. Heinrich Harburg, 1 game against a Group of 5 team, although I think we all believe a fairly solid Group of 5 team. What's the most fair way to kind of compare these 2 guys and what we've seen from them so far this season?
Oh man, I think one fair way to think about it is, who kept the ball out of harm's way. But I think you have to mitigate that with obviously the environment that Jeff Sims played in versus the environment that Harburg played in.
Mm-hmm.
One of those environments was a lot easier to play in than another. I think you can assess big plays. They both made big plays. I think they both did. Harburg had a nice throw to Marcus Washington. The 33-yard play didn't involve Harburg a ton. That was a great play call to Alex Bullock. But, Harburg got the ball out there. I thought did a nice job with that. Sims had his own big plays that he made that were his and deserves credit for. I think you get a sense of what teammates how they reacted, what they did. Did they respond to the backup? Seemed like they did, but only Coach Rhule and his staff really know the answer to that question.
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing to see it on the field; it's another thing to see it in practice. Things like that. And I think you have to assess the health of the starter too. I mean, Sims isn't 100%, and you feel like you can go out and play and win a football game against Louisiana Tech with the backup. Then I think I'm not saying it's calling kicking the can down the road. But I think it's saying, hey, let's let the guy get back to 100%, and then we'll make an assessment going into a game that, in order to compete with and beat Michigan, you're gonna have to play really well, and you're gonna have to play really safe. So let's see what Harburg maybe does in another game. Maybe Nebraska wins it, but he turns it over 3 times. That kind of thing. Like let's assess what happens that way. Unless Sims is 100% this week, and then you may have a difficult decision to make.
Sam, when I can hear it in your voice, and you're pretty smart. You've watched this a long time. I think you can understand positivity in the moment and giving flowers, but you understand you want to look at things long-term too. Do you get the sense Nebraska thinks like you do, almost in your initial answer to Ravi, where there were some things there that were really good, but then it's ... but. Do you think Nebraska's staff wakes up this morning feeling the same way?
I'm guessing that they had assessed that really well yesterday. I'm guessing that, I'm sure there's a thought process of where do we get better? They can't get caught up in what I suspect will be sort of I got texts, I'm sure you guys did, emails, of people like Heinrich Harburg's the guy. Like, this is the guy that we want to see next week. They won't get caught up in that. I mean, they have to make their own sort of objective. Objective is not quite the right word, but they have to be able to make a sober decision after they've seen the tape and after they see what he did or didn't do in the game and think about, okay, what did we do to put him in good spots? What can we carry over to the next game? If that interception is caught, in the third quarter, how might that have changed the game? You have to think about those things. Those are all things that you chew on. They're not going to look ahead on Louisiana Tech. They just got to go win that game, and I think they're going to put all their energy toward that. Michigan's trouble enough. You can worry about Michigan in a week. Michigan's not going to change. I think they can make all those assessments. We'll probably be somewhat honest today. He didn't go over the top with Harburg on Saturday. I think he knows how that's going to come off. And I think he's mindful of what he says out in public. And I think Jeff Sims had a role in helping Harburg get ready for the game. I mean, I thought Sims was very positive on the sideline. And not every starting quarterback who's banged up is that way. Not all of them. He was. And so I think there's, that game probably said a lot about the staff and about Harburg's teammates. It said a lot about Harburg too. There's some things he did well that I had not seen in spring games, and so he deserves credit for that. He did a nice job with some of the quick throws with the screens. He threw those passes confidently, and I thought that looked real nice. And then the ball was, and I'm not trying to be too harsh here on Sims, the ball was not 3 yards off the ground or 2 yards off the ground. I mean, Harburg threw it up so that people could catch the ball. And I think one of the things with Sims is he's got to get the ball a little bit off the ground, and he's got to just throw it a little higher. And that's probably something people watch. I think Harburg had one pass knocked down, but Sims was having I think issues with
not that I'm counting.
Two. There's just the flatness of Sims' arc is to me is something they can work on. I don't think that's a set in stone thing, but I think Harburg, did some things well. I think there's some things he, obviously needs to work on, but he did some things well.
Sam, was there a point in that game defensively where you said to yourself, this is more about Nebraska than it is about Northern Illinois? Was there ever that point, or were you thinking to yourself predominantly, man, Northern Illinois isn't very good offensively?
There were a couple of people next to me that were like, boy, Northern Illinois is not very good. I think Nebraska controls its own standard of hustle and toughness and aggression, and Nebraska has that irrespective of who they're playing. So the play that I described at the beginning of my story going into Sunday was actually kind of a throwaway play. I mean, I think it was 2nd and 15. And, they threw the ball out in the flat to their best player. And, he made Luke Reimer miss, and there were 6 guys running to the ball. And it was, Singleton and Brown and the corner on that side and Chief Porter. Everybody's running. And it's like, this isn't about Northern Illinois. This is about Nebraska. They run to the ball. They hit. They tackle. Their defensive line. And, and I asked Quentin Newsom in the postgame, I'm like, what's it like to kind of cover with this pass rush? Because he hasn't really had the luxury of this kind of pass rush. And, obviously he gave a pretty bland answer, but like this is a different life for a corner. They're able to, they're not having to cover for 7 sets. And, so I think, I think Nebraska's defense is doing things organically. Northern Illinois made some weird play calls early, 3rd and 5, and you're running you're running a little draw into the teeth of the defense. A defense that's given up virtually nothing in the middle of the field, running the ball. That was an odd call. They did some other things that I think were not great. They dropped some passes. They just flat out dropped them. So they didn't play well, but I think Nebraska rattled them, and I think the crowd probably rattled them because Boston College's crowd isn't like Nebraska's crowd. And so, there's things that Nebraska's defense did that they'll carry over to this week. Michigan will be a unique test, but I would say this, I think Nebraska's defense is up for it. I think they're up for that test. I think they're willing to put it on the line and not be intimidated by anything that Michigan's going to put on the field. And Michigan's pretty good, but they're not going to be intimidated by Michigan.
We're talking with Sam McKewon from the Omaha World-Herald. Sam, speaking of that defense a little bit, I'm looking at the snap count sheet and looking at how many different guys are getting in and how many different contributors you have. You've got Cam Lenhart, who comes off 2 sacks against Colorado, only gets 6 snaps this week. Sounds like he got banged up a little bit, but having that level of playmaker all of a sudden removed from the equation, or last week, Ty Robinson obviously doesn't play the first half, and you don't see a drop off. How much different is that from defenses we've seen in the past where it felt like, hey, if they're missing a guy at a key spot, it might be a really big problem. It doesn't seem to have phased this defense basically at all.
Not too much, no. And Newsom's out on the field for pretty much every play. So, that was pretty notable. Singleton's out there for everything, although he's a relatively new player. Gifford is, but they do a good job of rotating their defensive linemen around, getting guys on the field who can make plays. I think they've done a really nice job. There's no complaints. I think that they've coached really well at all three levels. I think they've got strong position coaches. The players are responding to Knighton. Dvorak, I think, is quite a good coach based on the way he's developed some of the players that they have there now and how Luke Reimer hasn't really lost his step. He's still really good. Evan Cooper in the back end has been able to unlock Deshaun Singleton. Singleton's a good player, and I think he's doing some good things. So is Omar Brown. So I think you just credit that side of the ball, the staff, the coordinator. They're working together. I think Tony White deserves a lot of credit because none of these guys are his position coach hires, and yet everybody seems to be functioning together.
Well, he did get to bring a couple of his guys, though.
He did, and they're in the box, I think. So schematically, they helped him.
One, Sam, that is man. Sam, air high five from afar. I'm dead serious, Sam. I'm gonna tell you why. I always shoot you straight. I said the level of communication. This is after the Minnesota game. The level of communication and how folks handle. Ravi, did I not say this?
You did.
Handle themselves on the sidelines between offense and defense is important. The defense seems to be much more on the same page as the offense. A lot of the reasons why, Sam, the communication style between the headsets and the sidelines 100% matters when you have to make on the field adjustments. It totally matters. You saying that he has his guys in the box totally matters. When you're a good giver of information, how you receive it from others when you have to pass it along secondhand is critical. Right?
Agreed. Yeah. I think that's helped him a lot because it allows it. In some ways, they're well paid analysts, but it's freed them up a little bit, I think, to kind of coach on the sidelines because he basically has his knowledge base, seeing the overarching worldview. I think on the offensive side of the ball, a lot of those guys are down in the box. I think Josh Martin, the tight ends coach, is up in the box, and that's fine. I think there's, for example, on that same drive where they had the 6 or 7 guys running the ball, on 1st and 15, Nebraska shifts into a blitz based on the guy hadn't even motioned yet. And then the guy motions over, and they had already shifted into the blitz that was going to go right to Rocky Lombardi rolling out to his right. They already knew what he was doing. And it's impressive. Like they when you watch that defense, you see guys kind of moving in and out, and they know where they're going. The offense doesn't know where they're going, and it all sort of fits together. It doesn't mean that they're perfect. There were moments against Colorado, especially late in that game, where Colorado found a couple of things. That's a good offensive coordinator at Colorado, and he's smart too. And Michigan will find some things too, especially with Jim Harbaugh back. But man, it's complex, and they do a really good job. And I think that defense can hold up over the course of a year based on the number of guys they're playing, and also the defense they're playing. Bob Diaco ran a 3-4 back in 2017, but he was asking players to do some things in space, and they were 273 pounds. And I'm not trying to defend Bob Diaco because Bob's smart, but he was strange. If Bob had some of the players that Nebraska has right now, he probably could have done a few more things that he didn't have the luxury of doing back then because they had run a 4-3 and Frida Makamoladun and Alex Davis were defensive ends. Trying to ask those guys to play around in space was hard. It was challenging. Well, now Nebraska's got guys like MJ Sherman and Javen Wright. These guys can play in space, and I think Tony White is doing a heck of a job. And through 3 games doesn't mean it'll last, but he's certainly earning his money so far.
Hey, Sam, let me ask you this. When you watch Nebraska offensively and you look at Bonner and Borkacher and Thomas Fedoni and, Washington and Kemp and those guys, can you assess what they mean to this football team independent of the quarterback, or do you think those things just naturally have to go together?
That's a good question. I think sure. I mean, I think you can assess, how they're playing. Well, you can assess how they're blocking. Absolutely. That plays a factor. You can assess, whether they're getting open, how they're adjusting their route. Those things matter. I thought the offense all did a pretty good job of helping Harburg out. Obviously, Harburg's not going to know everything he needs to know, and you can't expect him to in his first start. So I thought they did a nice job of helping them out. I think they made a few plays. Ongoing, obviously, Nebraska needs to continue to find ways to get more skilled talent on the field and so on and so forth. Ideally, Jeff Sims would be a really, really polished and not making any turnovers, and you could use Harburg as a weapon. But that's just not where they were at in the first two games. And so some of what Nebraska has to assess is, can we get Jeff Sims back to where we thought he was going to be? Can we get him back to that place? And then can we use Harburg as a side dish, as a player who you can put all over the field, or you can bring in as a runner or a thrower, bring him in as a change of pace player. That's something that I think they're probably going to have to assess. There's all these multiple levels of questions, right? So you have the moment right in front of you, which is Louisiana Tech. Man, it'd be good to get another win because you're trying to think about, hey, how do we get this team to continue momentum before they play the number 2 or 3 team in the country? And then you're thinking about, what does this look like for the week after Louisiana Tech? Then you're looking at, what does this look like for the rest of the season? And then what does it look like in the out years? As you're imagining. So you have to imagine all those things kind of at once when you're a head coach. And even though you focus on the moment, there's always going to be a moment during the course of the week where you're looking at a Harvard and go like, could this be our guy for the next 2 or 3 years? Or, you're always assessing those things as you go along, because when you build a program, you're not just building the week, you're building the whole thing. And a quarterback is huge to that discussion. I'm a Bears fan, and I think one of the questions that the Bears have to consistently think about now after 2 weeks is, okay, how do we win the next week? Well, that's going to be hard. And then how can we move Justin Fields if we need to move him? And what are we going to, all right, we got to get our scouts out, and we're probably not going to get Caleb Williams unless we're the worst team in the NFL again. So we better go see Drake May, and we better go see this kid named Shedeur Sanders. We better go see if what this kid brings to the table is overwhelms the when he gets upset, he eye gouges a teammate or an opponent. Because you can't do that in the NFL once. A quarterback doing that in the NFL to a defensive lineman is not going to go well for that quarterback. So you got to go out and you got to assess Shedeur Sanders now. If you're the Bears, you have to have all those things in your mind all at once. And it's not quite that way in college, but Nebraska has to assess those things as it goes along too. Are the players around the quarterback good enough, and are they playing well enough to get a full assessment of what that quarterback's capable of?
Sam, let me ask you something along the lines of kind of what we were just describing of the performances independent of the quarterback. Obviously, Fedoni had a couple of big plays in that one, some really good blocks. Do you understand why he may be frustrated or maybe shush the crowd? Because gosh, I talk to you so much, I feel like you have an unfair advantage, right? You have a really, really, really good pulse of what goes on behind the scenes because you're close to it, and what some of the sentiment was about the hype, and that it just being hype. I'd say, he hasn't played in 3 years, and he pays attention to social media and what people say. And do you give a little grace there for him when he does? Because he clearly said, he intimated, those that know. in terms of who he was talking to. In that moment for a 20-year-old, do you understand those emotions bubbling over? Because I certainly do.
Yeah, I do. I understand how he would feel a certain way.
I mean, he hasn't been treated the greatest publicly. And I know if people say that that's the vocal minority, okay, but that's who he's hearing from. That's what makes them the vocal portion.
Mm-hmm.
Like I understand fully why he's upset.
I understand. I certainly can place myself in those shoes emotionally. I think the majority of the people in Memorial Stadium are pretty thrilled that he's doing things on
100%. It's just hard, man.
So,
like that's a very mature perspective, right?
Yeah. And so I think this is his first go round. I'm sure it's exhilarating and exciting. What he's experiencing right now. I mean, he's got 2 of the team's 4 touchdown catches. That's pretty cool. And I'm sure, and the other thing that Fedoni's probably not going to say, but is going through is, I don't have Shedeur Sanders as my quarterback, and he wouldn't think of Shedeur Sanders because whatever, but he doesn't have this guy at Colorado, who's their tight end, got about 30 catches, and he's pretty good. But I think part of what Nebraska needs to work through, and Fedoni was willing to come to Nebraska and go through all of these growing pains, is do they have guys that can throw the ball to their tight ends and their receivers? They're working through that. Fedoni's been a die-in-the-wool Nebraska fan his whole life, and I'm sure he's thrilled that things are starting to go the right way. Over time, and this, if he continues to have success, I'm guessing that the frustrations will burn off, and it won't be about the 3 or 4 people out there who doubt him. It'll be about the people who believe in him. But that takes time, and I think, again, I always have expectations that young players are going to go through a range of emotions, good and bad, and that's what Fedoni, I think, is experiencing.
Sam McKewon from the Omaha World Herald. Sam, we appreciate it as always. We'll talk to you next week.
Take care.
All right.
We got a lot to get to.
Yeah, we
got to dial in. There's some guts in here.
We have a ton to get to, and we will do that coming up next on Benning and Lula.